Some family inheritances come with more than just old furniture and faded photographs. Sometimes they come with secrets so dark, so unthinkable, that they challenge everything you believe about the people who raised you. This is the story of Emma Richardson, a 28-year-old marketing executive from Boston, who thought inheriting her grandmother's Victorian house in Salem, Massachusetts, would be nothing more than a tedious weekend of sorting through dusty belongings and old memories. What Emma discovered beneath the floorboards of that 1692 colonial home would not only change her understanding of her family forever, but force her to make a choice that would determine whether she became the next link in a chain of unimaginable horror or the one brave enough to break it. This is a story about family legacies, about secrets that span centuries, and about the terrifying realization that sometimes the people we love most are capable of things we never imagined possible. The rain was falling steadily on that October morning when Emma first stepped to the front door of her grandmother's house, carrying nothing but a box of garbage bags and the naive belief that she was simply there to clean out an old woman's belongings. She had no idea that beneath her feet lay a chamber of horrors that would reveal the true nature of the Richardson family bloodline. Emma Richardson had always felt an unexplainable uneasiness whenever she visited her grandmother's house as a child. The Victorian structure, built in 1692, stood like a dark sentinel on Chestnut Street in Salem, its weathered shingles and narrow windows giving it an almost accusatory appearance against the gray October sky. Now, 3 weeks after her grandmother Eleanor's sudden death at age 89, Emma found herself holding the brass key to a house that had been in her family for over 3 centuries. The neighbors had watched silently from their windows as Emma parked her Honda Civic in the gravel driveway. Mrs. Henderson from next door, whom Emma remembered as friendly during childhood visits, quickly averted her gaze and closed her curtains when Emma waved. It was the first sign that something was deeply wrong in this quiet Salem neighborhood. Inside, the house smelled of lavender and something else Emma couldn't quite identify, something sweet and cloying that seemed to emanate from the walls themselves. Her grandmother had been meticulous in life, but the house felt different now, as if secrets were finally allowed to breathe in Eleanor's absence. Family portraits lined the hallway, generations of Richardson women staring down with eyes that seemed to follow Emma's movement through the house. In the kitchen, Emma discovered something that made her pause. Arranged on the windowsill were 17 small potted plants, each one completely dead despite being in healthy soil. They were positioned in a perfect circle, and when Emma looked closer, she noticed that each pot had a small piece of paper underneath with dates written in her grandmother's handwriting. The dates spanned from 1954 to 2019, and Emma couldn't shake the feeling that they represented something far more sinister than a gardening failure. The basement door, which Emma remembered being perpetually locked during childhood visits, now stood slightly ajar. When she asked her grandmother about it as a child, Eleanor would always change the subject quickly, saying the basement was dangerous and off-limits. Now, with trembling hands, Emma pushed the door open and descended the creaking wooden steps into the darkness below. The basement was larger than she expected, with stone walls that clearly predated the house above. In one corner sat her grandfather's old workbench, covered in dust and tools that hadn't been touched in decades. But what drew Emma's attention was the far wall, where the stone blocks seemed newer, as if they had been recently repaired or replaced. Running her hand along the wall, she could feel cold air seeping through tiny gaps in the mortar. As night fell, Emma decided to stay in the house rather than drive back to Boston. She had taken time off work to handle the estate, and something about leaving felt wrong, as if she was abandoning a mystery that demanded to be solved. She made herself dinner using canned soup she found in the pantry and tried to ignore the way the house seemed to settle and creak around her, as if it were adjusting to her presence. That night, Emma was awakened by a sound she would never forget, a rhythmic scraping that seemed to come from directly beneath her bedroom floor. It lasted for exactly 17 minutes, stopping and starting in patterns that felt almost like communication. When she got up to investigate, the sound stopped immediately, leaving only the oppressive silence of the old house and the growing certainty that her grandmother had died taking terrible secrets with her to the grave. The next morning, Emma called a local contractor to inspect the house's foundation. Jake Morrison, a weathered man in his 50s who had lived in Salem his entire life, arrived with his tools and an expression that grew increasingly troubled as Emma explained what she had heard during the night. "Your grandmother never mentioned any structural work being done on this house," Jake said, running his hands along the basement's stone walls. "But these stones here, they're definitely not original to the foundation. Someone's been doing work down here, and recently too." As Jake moved his flashlight along the wall, both he and Emma noticed something that made them freeze. Behind the newer stonework, they could see the outline of what appeared to be a doorway that had been deliberately sealed. The mortar was different, fresher, and when Jake tapped on it with his hammer, the sound was hollow. "Ma'am, I think there's a room back there," Jake said, his voice dropping to a whisper. "But I gotta tell you, I've worked on a lot of old houses in Salem, and I've never seen anything like this. This looks like someone was trying real hard to keep something sealed up." Emma made a decision that would change everything. "Open it." Jake hesitated. "You sure about that?" Sometimes old houses keep their secrets for good reasons, but Emma was determined. The sound she had heard, the dead plants, the way the neighbors avoided looking at the house, everything pointed to secrets that had been buried long enough. She needed to know what her family had been hiding. It took Jake nearly 3 hours to carefully remove enough stones to create an opening large enough for a person to pass through. As the final stone was lifted away, a rush of cold, stale air escaped from the hidden room, carried with it that same sweet, cloying smell Emma had noticed upstairs, but now so concentrated it made both of them gag. Jake shined his flashlight through the opening, and what he saw made him drop the tool with a clatter. "Jesus Christ," he whispered, backing away from the wall. "Ma'am, I think you need to call the police. Right now." But Emma was already moving toward the opening, driven by a compulsion she couldn't explain. She picked up the fallen flashlight and aimed it into the darkness beyond the wall. What she saw made her understand why her grandmother had sealed this room, why the neighbors avoided her family, and why 17 dead plants sat in perfect formation on the kitchen windowsill. The beam of light revealed a stone chamber that was clearly much older than the house above, with walls that disappeared into shadows, and a ceiling so low that an adult would have to crouch to move around. But it wasn't the architecture that made Emma's blood turn to ice. It was what hung on those ancient stone walls. What do you think Emma discovered in that hidden chamber? Have you ever inherited something from a family member that made you question everything you thought you knew about them? Share your thoughts in the comments below, because what Emma found next would test the very limits of what a human mind can accept as reality. Emma crawled through the opening into the hidden chamber. Despite Jake's protests from behind her, the air inside was thick and oppressive, filled with that sickening sweet smell that now made perfect, horrible sense. Her flashlight beam swept across the stone walls, revealing a nightmare that would be burned into her memory forever. 17 human skeletons hung from iron chains bolted directly into the stone walls. Each skeleton was positioned upright, arms spread wide, as if they had been crucified against the ancient stones. The chains were old but well-maintained, showing no signs of rust despite what must have been decades or even centuries in this underground tomb. But the skeletons themselves told a story that was far more disturbing than simple murder. Each skull bore intricate symbols that had been carved directly into the bone, symbols that looked both ancient and deliberately crafted. The carvings were precise, made with tools designed specifically for etching into human bone, and they formed patterns that seemed to pulse and shift in the dancing flashlight beam. At the base of each skeleton lay personal belongings that had been carefully preserved: watches, jewelry, clothing items, and small photographs. Emma approached the nearest skeleton and picked up a faded driver's license from 1987. The face staring back at her was that of Michael Torres, a 23-year-old man from Boston. His bones bore the same intricate carvings as the others, and his jaw hung open in what could only be described as a final, silent scream. In the center of the chamber stood a stone altar, roughly 3 feet high and covered with dark stains that were unmistakably blood. The stains formed patterns around circular indentations in the stone, as if objects had been placed there repeatedly over many years. Scattered around the altar were candles of various ages, some barely used, others burned down to mere stubs, suggesting that this room had been in active use until very recently. Emma moved systematically from skeleton to skeleton, documenting what she found. The dates on the personal items span from 1954 to 2019, exactly matching the dates she found under the dead plants in her grandmother's kitchen. Each victim appeared to be young, between the ages of 18 and 30, and each had been reported missing from various locations throughout New England, though Emma wouldn't discover this until later. The walls themselves told their own story, beyond the horrific display of human remains. Emma could see that the chamber predated even the 1692 house above. The stonework was colonial, possibly even earlier, suggesting that this underground room had been built by the first Richardson settlers who came to Salem. Along the walls, carved directly into the stone, were more of the strange symbols she had seen on the bones, along with what appeared to be family names and dates going back to the 1600s. Jake had followed Emma into the chamber, and now stood frozen in the doorway, his face pale with shock. "Emma," he whispered, "we need to get out of here. We need to call the police right now." But Emma was transfixed by something else she had discovered. In a small alcove carved into the far wall, she found a leather-bound journal wrapped in oilcloth. The book was thick, its pages yellow with age, and when she opened it, she recognized her grandmother's handwriting immediately. The first entry was dated just 3 weeks ago, the day before Eleanor Richardson died. "Jake," Emma said, her voice barely audible, "I think my grandmother left this for me to find." The journal's pages were filled with meticulous records, names, dates, locations, and detailed descriptions of what her grandmother called the family responsibility. As Emma read, her hands began to shake uncontrollably. The journal didn't just document the 17 skeletons in this chamber. It revealed that they were only the most recent victims in a practice that had been carried out by Richardson women for over 3 centuries. Thank you so much for staying with us through this incredibly disturbing revelation. We truly appreciate your dedication to hearing this story through to its conclusion, and we promise you that what Emma discovers in her grandmother's journal will be even more shocking than what she's already witnessed. The true horror of the Richardson family's secret is only just beginning to unfold. Emma's hands trembled as she opened her grandmother's journal to the first page. Written in Eleanor's familiar, precise handwriting were words that would haunt Emma for the rest of her life. "For Emma, my chosen successor, the burden of our bloodline now falls to you, as it fell to me at your age and to my grandmother before me. What you have discovered is not evil, child, it is necessity." The journal revealed a family history that stretched back to 1692, when Emma's ancestor, Mercy Richardson, had made a pact that saved her from the Salem witch trials but bound her descendants to an unthinkable obligation. According to Eleanor's meticulous records, Mercy had encountered something in the woods outside Salem, something ancient and hungry that had been disturbed by the witch trial hysteria and the spilling of innocent blood. The entity feeds on human life force, Eleanor had written, but it can be contained through ritual sacrifice. 17 souls every generation, chosen carefully and offered willingly through our family stewardship. In exchange, it grants our bloodline protection from harm, prosperity in our endeavors, and most importantly, it remains bound to the chamber beneath our ancestral home. Emma read entry after entry describing how her grandmother had selected victims over the years. They weren't random choices. Each person had been carefully studied, chosen for specific qualities that would make their life force most potent for the entity. Eleanor had befriended them, gained their trust, and then lured them to the house under various pretenses. The process of their sacrifice was described in clinical detail that made Emma physically ill. "The symbols carved into their bones aren't decorations," one entry explained. "They are binding runes that anchor their souls to this place, preventing them from moving on to whatever comes after death. Their trapped energy feeds the entity continuously, keeping it satisfied and contained. Without this nourishment, it would break free and consume everything within a 100-mile radius of Salem. But the most chilling revelation came in the journal's final entries, written in the days before Eleanor's death. She had been dying of cancer, kept alive only by the entity's protection. And now that she was gone, the responsibility would pass to the next Richardson woman, Emma. "I have watched you, granddaughter," Eleanor had written. "I have seen your strength, your willingness to make hard choices for the greater good. The entity has chosen you, as it chose me. You will know this because you were able to find this chamber. It called to you, drew you here. The dead plants in my kitchen represent the 17 souls that must be renewed. They died when I did, and now you must replace them, or the entity will break free." Emma discovered that she had exactly 30 days from her grandmother's death to complete the first sacrifice, or the entity would consider the pact broken. According to the journal, she would know the entity was growing restless because she would begin to hear the sounds Emma had experienced her first night in the house: the scraping, the movements beneath the floorboards, the whispers in the walls. The journal also revealed why the neighbors avoided the Richardson family. Over the decades, locals had noticed a pattern of young people disappearing after being seen with Eleanor Richardson. They suspected something, but the Richardson family's wealth and influence in Salem, bolstered by their supernatural patron, had always protected them from serious investigation. The police reports were always filed. Eleanor had written, "The family's always grieved." But the evidence never pointed definitively to our family, because the entity ensures we are protected from discovery. As long as we honor our obligation, we remain untouchable. Emma read the journal's final entry 3 times before its meaning fully sank in. Emma will understand, as I came to understand, that 17 lives sacrificed every generation is a small price to pay for preventing the consumption of thousands. She will see that we are not monsters, we are guardians, keeping something far worse contained. The alternative to our family's burden is unthinkable. As Emma finished reading, she became aware that Jake had been silent for far too long. She looked up from the journal to find him staring at her with an expression of growing horror. He had been reading over her shoulder, and now he understood exactly what kind of family Emma had inherited and what she was expected to do. "Emma," Jake whispered, backing toward the chamber entrance, "you're not seriously considering this, are you? This is insane. We call the FBI. We expose this whole thing, and we let them deal with whatever your crazy family thought they were protecting the world from." But Emma was no longer listening to Jake. She was listening to something else, a low, rhythmic scratching that seemed to come from the walls themselves, and a voice, barely audible, that whispered her name with an authority that made her bones ache. The scratching sounds grew louder as Emma stood in the chamber, still clutching her grandmother's journal. Jake had backed all the way to the entrance, his face pale with terror. But Emma found herself strangely calm as the reality of her situation became clear. The entity her family had been feeding for centuries was awakening, and she could feel its attention turning toward her like a physical presence. "Emma, we're leaving. Right now," Jake demanded, but his voice seemed to come from very far away. Emma was focused on the symbols carved into the chamber walls, which had begun to glow with a faint, sickly light that hadn't been there before. As Emma watched, the light grew stronger, and she began to understand that the symbols weren't just decorative. They were a containment system, a supernatural prison that required constant feeding to maintain its effectiveness. The 17 skeletons chained to the walls weren't just victims. They were the bars of a cage designed to hold something far more dangerous than any human predator. The scratching stopped abruptly, replaced by a voice that seemed to come from everywhere at once. "Emma Richardson, granddaughter of Eleanor, daughter of the bloodline that bound me, you have found your inheritance." Jake bolted from the chamber, his footsteps echoing up the basement stairs as he fled the house entirely. Emma could hear his truck starting in the driveway, then the sound of gravel as he sped away, leaving her alone with the voice and the growing realization that running was not an option for her. "Your grandmother served faithfully for 67 years, the voice continued, and Emma could see shapes moving in the shadows between the chained skeletons. She understood that some sacrifices preserved the lives of many. The 17 souls bound here have prevented me from consuming the population of entire cities. Their suffering serves a greater purpose. Emma opened her grandmother's journal to a page she had missed before, marked with a pressed flower. Eleanor's handwriting was shaky here, written clearly in her final days. The entity showed me what happens if the pact is broken. I have seen Boston consumed in a single night, its population drained to feed a hunger that has waited 3 centuries for freedom. I have seen the darkness spread across New England like wildfire, leaving empty cities in its wake. This vision is not threat. It is prophecy. Our family bears this burden so that others may live. You doubt, the voice said, and Emma felt something cold brush against her cheek. Let me show you what your grandmother saw. The chamber around Emma dissolved, replaced by visions that felt more real than reality itself. She stood on a hill overlooking Boston and watched as something invisible moved through the city below. Street by street, building by building, the lights went out as every living thing within was drained of life. The process took less than an hour, and when it was finished, Boston was a tomb containing over 600,000 corpses. The vision shifted, showing Emma the things hunger spreading outward: Worcester, Springfield, Hartford, Providence. Each city consumed in turn as the entity grew stronger and hungrier. The death toll climbed into millions, and still the creature was not satisfied. It would continue feeding until the entire East Coast was empty of human life. This is your choice, Emma Richardson, the voice said as the visions faded and the chamber materialized around her again. Honor the pact your family made. Continue the tradition that protected countless lives. Or break it and watch everything you know consumed by my hunger. Emma sank to her knees in the chamber, overwhelmed by the magnitude of what she was being asked to do. 17 innocent lives, chosen by her, lured to their deaths to feed something that should never have existed. But the alternative, the systematic extinction of millions, made her choice seem almost inevitable. How? She whispered. As your grandmother did. As her grandmother did. You will choose carefully. You will gain their trust, and you will bring them here willingly. Their deaths will be quick, and their souls will serve a purpose greater than any they could have achieved in life. You will become the guardian of this prison, as your bloodline has been for 3 centuries. Emma thought of her normal life in Boston, her marketing job, her apartment, her friends who had no idea that their continued existence depended on the actions of people like her grandmother. She thought of the missing person reports, the families who never got answers, the carefully covered tracks that kept the Richardson family's secret safe. And if I refuse, then you will live just long enough to witness the consequences of your choice. Boston first, then the spreading darkness that your family has prevented for 300 years. The blood of millions will be on your hands, Emma Richardson, because you lack the strength to spill the blood of 17. Emma stood slowly, her decision crystallizing with a clarity that terrified her. She understood now why her grandmother had lived to be 89, why Richardson women always seemed to prosper despite their terrible burden. The entity protected its servants, ensured their success, granted them long lives to serve their purpose. I accept, Emma said, and the symbols on the chamber walls pulsed brighter, acknowledging her commitment to continue a family tradition that was both monstrous and necessary. The entity's presence faded, leaving Emma alone with the 17 skeletons and the knowledge of what she would have to become. She climbed back through the opening into the basement, sealed the chamber wall with new stones, and began planning how she would select her first victim. 6 months later, Emma Richardson lived in Salem full-time, having quit her marketing job and used her inherited wealth to establish herself as a respected member of the community. The neighbors, who had watched the Richardson family with suspicion for generations, now saw her as they had seen her grandmother, a pillar of the community, generous with charities, always willing to help young people in need. The first skeleton now hung in the chamber below, and 16 more spaces waited to be filled. Emma had discovered that her grandmother was right. The burden became easy to bear when you understood that each life you took saved thousands of others. She had become the guardian of an ancient prison, the latest link in a chain of necessity that stretched back 3 centuries. And in the quiet moments late at night, when she heard the satisfied whispers from beneath her floorboards, Emma Richardson knew she had made the only choice she could live with. Some family legacies are worth preserving, no matter the cost. This story forces us to confront an impossible moral question. When faced with the choice between sacrificing a few to save many, what would you do? Emma Richardson found herself inheriting not just a house, but a burden that had protected countless lives for 3 centuries. Her family weren't monsters. They were guardians of a terrible necessity. What do you think about Emma's choice? Was she right to continue her family's dark tradition, or should she have found another way? Have you ever discovered family secrets that change how you viewed your relatives? Share your thoughts in the comments below, because stories like these remind us that sometimes the people we think we know best are carrying burdens we can't imagine. If this story left you questioning the nature of family obligations and moral choices, make sure to subscribe to our channel and hit the notification bell for more stories that explore the darkest corners of human experience. Your support helps us continue bringing you these thought-provoking tales that challenge everything you think you know about right and wrong. And don't miss our next video, The Basement Voices That Saved My Life from a Home Invasion, a story about sounds that shouldn't exist protecting a family from danger, proving that sometimes the most terrifying things in our lives are also the most protective. Click now to watch a story that will make you reconsider every unexplained noise you've ever heard in your home.